Yes, I heard you. Recording in progress. Hello and welcome. I'm Rick Moore, MSO News Sports, along with the Massachusetts Senate Minority Leader, Senator Bruce Tarr. Senator, it's been a long time. Welcome back, and how are you?
I'm doing great, Rick. Thank you. And it has been a while, but you know what? Since we last talked, it's gotten a little bit warmer. There's a little bit more sunshine outside. We've weathered some snowstorms and we've done well. I know that you have done a little bit of traveling, but you're looking good. So I hope things are good with you.
Thank you, sir. They are. I didn't get enough skiing in this winter. I miss winter already, but we'll talk about that some other time. So much going on, Senator Tarr. I'm really not even sure where to start, but you gave me a hint on how to do that. So let's start with the number one topic of interest today. It concerns the Soldiers' Home bill that you have sponsored and so on. Would you please update us on that?
Well, you know, Rick, I can't take credit for the bill itself. It was supported unanimously in the Senate, and it came out of the Ways and Means Committee, and there was a lot of good leadership on this bill. A lot of credit to some of the veterans who are still serving our country in the Senate chamber, Senator John Velas from Westfield, and also Senator Mike Rush from West Roxbury, active members of our military who helped to lead the charge. So I wasn't a lead sponsor of the bill, but very supportive of it. And something that's interesting, Rick, is that we debated this bill last week. We took it up on March 10th, and it was the first debate that we've had in the Senate chamber in 2 years where folks didn't wear masks. As you know, the state Senate's been reopened now for a short time after 2 years of being closed, and it was truly a unique experience to be in the chamber and debating something that folks feel so passionately about, and rightly so, and to be doing it without the necessity of wearing a mask. So in and of itself, that would have made the debate significant, but it was much more significant than even that. And so as we've talked about, Rick, the legislature has been working in a very committed way to try to address the situation with our soldiers' homes. We have two currently in Massachusetts, as you know, one in Chelsea and one in Holyoke. And of course, I think by now we all know the story of what happened in Holyoke, where COVID-19 claimed the lives of over 76 veterans who were living in that home because of a variety of systemic problems. And so a while ago, the legislature passed a bill to be able to rebuild or build a new soldiers' home in Holyoke that will cost about $400 million. And also we appropriated another $200 million to look at building facilities in other parts of the state, because as I mentioned, we only have two, one in Chelsea and one in Holyoke, but there are veterans spread all across the Commonwealth for whom those two facilities are not easily accessed. And so that bill was done, that money is in the pipeline, but the bill that we took up last week was about the management situation. How do we govern these homes to make sure that we don't have systemic failures, that the needs of our veterans are met, that we do it in an efficient way, that we limit a crisis if and when one happens so that we have the right chain of command and a transparent chain of command. That's what that bill is all about. And so one of the things that it does, Rick, is elevate the position of Secretary of Veterans Services. Right now we have a Secretary of Veterans Affairs, but it's sort of an awkward arrangement where that secretary is really a commissioner. So the bill that we did in the Senate creates a full cabinet position for the Secretary of Veterans Services. And one of the things I'm proudest of in the debate was an amendment that I sponsored, passed unanimously on a roll call vote, to require that secretary to be a veteran, so that the person representing veterans at the highest level of state government is in fact someone who has had military service, who understands the things that folks that serve our nation, the people that serve our nation have been through and continue to go through, and can speak not only with authority at that cabinet level, but who also can relate to the people that they are representing at the cabinet table. And so I was very pleased that that amendment passed. So at the top of that chain, would be, if the Senate bill makes it into law, there would now be a full Secretary of Veterans Services. And then beneath that, there would be a chain of command that involves having a superintendent of each veterans home and an executive director of all of the veterans homes. and regional councils to give input from the community into how those homes are managed and run. There would be an ombudsman to be able to receive complaints and to be able to bring about action on those complaints. And something that's very important, Rick, is that the superintendents, the folks that run the 2 veterans homes, and if we build more, that would be true of these folks as well, would need to be licensed as nursing home operators so that we would make sure that they have the qualifications to run these kind of facilities. And in addition to that, we would require the Department of Public Health to inspect these facilities twice a year. Again, to make sure that we never again get into a situation of substandard care or the possibility of transmission of infectious disease or anything that relates to negative health consequences for the people that live in the homes.
That sounds very comprehensive, and I want to ask you a question that we didn't talk about in our pregame warm-up, but it just comes to my mind as a former math teacher, is simple but elegant. And in the cabinet position, will that person have hands-on experience and contact, and will there be direct guidelines so that there is a simplification of this where government is involved sometimes, Senator, even at the local level? There's miscommunications and people aren't quite aware of what the chain of command is. So is that one of the things that maybe kind of fell through the cracks last time?
It's one of the most important features, Rick, is to have a clear chain of command. And in fact, you could argue that is one of the problems that we saw the last time. When we had problems developing in Holyoke, there was no clear chain of command for those claims to get elevated or those concerns to get elevated and for action to be taken. And there certainly hasn't been transparency in terms of how those things get dealt with. This bill would provide both of those things, a clear chain of command. It would also provide transparency, and it would ensure, Rick, to your point, that there are professionals involved who are qualified to be dealing with these kinds of issues. And that's very important. And there would be a way for folks to have input in the communities that are served by these homes. And again, right now we have 2, but we hopefully will have more as we seek to spread some of these services out across the state.
I think that's so important, Senator, and I congratulate you and your colleagues on working on that, because sometimes the war gets in front of the warriors and we forget who those people are, that there are brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, grandfathers, whatever. And when you get to a certain stage and you've been willing to sacrifice everything, it's important that we can back them up. So this is something so what's the next step in this process?
So let me just say, Rick, in an editorial sense, what I said on the floor of the Senate is these are folks who have faced threats to their lives and been in jeopardy all around the world. And yet many of them perished in Holyoke in a soldier's home with our name on it that said Massachusetts and with a state flag flying out front. That shouldn't have ever happened. And so we owe it the highest duty of care to them, and this bill would do that and provide it. So next, we will have to reconcile our bill with the similar bill that passed in the House. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. That'll likely result in a conference committee, and then that conference committee will produce a reconciliation, we hope, that would be accepted by both the House and the Senate, and then the bill would go to the desk of Governor Baker. So we've got several steps to go. But the good news is both the House and the Senate are focused on this issue. We're moving in the right direction, and hopefully soon we'll have a result in the form of a new law relative to our veterans' homes. And by the way, I should mention one of the important changes in the bill is to replace the reference to soldiers and sailors' homes and things of that nature with the singular term veterans' homes to encompass all of the folks that have served our nation.
So important, and best of luck with that, and thank you for that. Next,
thank you.
Talk budget, if you would, Senator.
So we've got a supplemental budget coming up, Rick, and the House took this up recently, and now the bill is in the Senate. It's a spending bill. We are going to take it up next week, and it spends, I believe, about $1.6 billion. And as we've talked about a little bit in the past, supplemental budgets are used to fill deficiencies when some accounts run out of money or are going to run out of money in the middle of the fiscal year before we pass the next budget and begin the next fiscal year. And this bill is one of those. And there are a whole host of needs that we're trying to address in the bill. And there are also some matters of public policy that are addressed in the bill. So right now, as presented by the Committee on Ways and Means, for instance, this bill contains an extension on outdoor dining for restaurants, something that's been absolutely critical for them to survive during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Similarly, there's an extension of the delivered cocktails from restaurants, cocktails served to go. So there are matters of public policy, but there are also matters of funding. And so, for instance, there's money in the bill to help with mental health issues for folks that are settling in Massachusetts, having been displaced from other parts of the world that are war-torn, like Afghanistan and Ukraine. There's money for a whole host of things in many, many categories in this bill. And one of the things I'm hoping to add to the bill, Rick, is some additional money for our nursing homes who are struggling to be able to retain staff because they aren't able to compensate their staff sufficiently enough to be competitive with other things. And so we're trying to put some money into the bill for that. I'm very pleased that we were able to get into the bill some additional money, in fact, it's $20 million, to help our home heating program in Massachusetts, the so-called LIHEAP program. We'd been contacted by a lot of the agencies that run fuel assistance programs. Of course, the most notable in our case is Action Energy, right here in Gloucester. And they said because of the rising prices of fuel, because of what's happening in Ukraine and other factors, it's very hard for the fuel assistance programs to keep up and for folks to be kept warm in their homes for the remainder of the home heating season. So I put together a letter and asked my colleagues to sign it. Roughly 20 of them did. And we asked for additional resources to be placed into the bill. And in fact, the Ways and Means Committee honored that request and put $20 million in. So there are some very strategic investments in this supplemental budget, and there could be more to come. As I said, we're going to debate the bill next week, and there's an amendment deadline of Monday at 3 p.m. So members right now are researching and drafting amendments to be debated on Thursday of next week.
Finally, Senator, it's been a wild couple of years, and every time you poke your head out of the gopher hole, something shoots you at it. There's a hammer coming at your head to pop you back down again. However, things are looking up in terms of the health situation here in the United States. But on the other hand, you do have a world crisis. And of course, you know, butterfly flaps its wings in China. It's going to make its effect here. So your overall outlook, maybe just kind of, I don't know what the term would be, but on where we're headed, because this is a time when I saw my first crocuses yesterday, as a matter of fact. The sun is out as we record this. There's no snow on the ground, and people are beginning to feel rejuvenated. So where are we?
Well, Rick, that is quite a metaphysical question, but let me suggest that we are in an important time in our history. We are emerging, hopefully for the last time, from the COVID-19 pandemic, but we still need to be alert to what's happening. As you and I have discussed offline, there's a new variant that's being tracked that could create some issues. It's highly contagious from what we know. But we also know we now have therapeutics that are available that we never had before to be able to deal with COVID-19, and some are showing very promising effects and benefits. So as we transition out of that difficulty, and hopefully for good, we now face a situation of certainly global disruption and a terrible situation that's happening in Ukraine with an unjustified war against an innocent group of people. And that alone is bad enough for us to be concerned, but it also has effects on things like the cost of fuel and home heating oil, because Russia is such a tremendous exporter of those kinds of things, and natural gas as well. And so we have to think about how we can best be positioned to deal with those impacts, even as our national leadership is trying to figure out the best way to address these unconscionable acts of aggression and hostility that are happening halfway across the globe. And so, Rick, one of the things that we're looking at in the legislature is how we can ensure that we do our part to join what has been an ever-increasing global coalition against these acts of war in Ukraine. And one of the ways that we can do that is to make sure that we are not in any way enabling the Russian government to be financing this war. And so there have been a couple of bills filed. I have filed some of them to be able to do that. One of them would enable our state treasurer, Deb Goldberg, and our state pension authority to divest of any Russian investments. And it appears so far that there's about $140 million of pension funds that are invested in things that connect ultimately to Russia. And Treasurer Goldberg has said that she cannot divest of them without legislative authority. So I filed a bill with the Senate Republican caucus. It has bipartisan support. Senator Timilty, my good friend from Milton, has also filed a similar bill. So we're working on divesting our pension assets from Russian investments. In addition to that, Governor Baker has been trying to identify contracts that we might have that benefit Russia. And similarly, I filed a bill to give him the statutory authority to break those contracts to the maximum extent possible under law. And so we're trying to give that authority. And then last, I filed a bill, again, with many colleagues, and there's bipartisan support for this, to look at Russian assets that may be in Massachusetts banks and do everything we can to make sure that Russia does not have access to those assets. And so, you know, Rick, it's very unusual for state government to get involved in foreign affairs. And I would argue that we should always keep our focus on state affairs and not be distracted by international matters or even national matters. But in this case, Massachusetts has a direct stake in resources that could be flowing to fuel the unconscionable acts that we're seeing in Ukraine. And so we're doing our best to put the tools on the table to be able to make sure that we are not unwitting enablers of what's going on in that part of the world.
I hope that every state government takes that position. So I appreciate that. Senator, anything else before we disconnect this and send you over to the next media interview?
Thanks, Rick. This is an important interview, and I don't want to end it prematurely, but I would also say that we're also looking at ways to help folks cope with the high cost of gasoline and commuting. And so we have a series of bills that we've filed on those subjects as well, to try to temporarily suspend the gas tax, to increase the commuter or create a commuter tax credit for 1 year, and increase the incentives available to be able to purchase electric vehicles. So we're trying to look at every aspect of the situation, and we'll probably have more to say when you and I get to talk about that next week. But